Hello and greetings. Welcome to our video, the first of two videos actually on the brain. We're going to focus in this video mainly on some basic parts of the brain and their functions, and then we'll get into some pathology, including brain issues like epilepsy and concussions in the subsequent video. So before we get going, let's start with this idea. The brain is actually the most complex organ in the body. It's about 100 billion neurons, and those neurons each make thousands and thousands of synaptic connections. So start doing the math. Billions and billions of neurons making thousands and thousands of connections. There is no reason you can't learn A and P. Okay, you can store a lot of memory, a lot of information in that brain. The neurons communicate in ways we already understand. We've already talked about neurotransmitters and how the neurotransmitters released from the axon of one neuron to the dendrite of the next are either going to inhibit or activate that neuron. So we've talked about that, but how does the brain actually control the body? It really does it in two basic ways. The brain is going to control motor function by stimulating eventually muscles to contract, and that could be smooth muscle or it can be skeletal muscle. It also controls the body's function by the release of hormones. It can cause glands to release hormones. It can cause the production of hormones. So those are the two basic mechanisms by which the brain controls the body. So with that, let's go ahead and look at the major regions of the brain, and then we'll hone in on some functions. As you can see here, the brain has some basic regions. What you see here, where the arrow is, from the purple represents the spinal cord, but the light blue, the orange, and the green represents the brainstem. And you see down here the medulla oblongata, great name, pons and midbrain, that makes up the brainstem. This orange area here, orange-red area, represents the diencephalon, and it's actually multiple parts that compose that, and we'll touch on those features. The part here in purple is the cerebellum. Some people call it the hindbrain. It's not the best term, but we'll look at its function. And then everything up here in the blue makes up the cerebrum. And we'll, again, localize functions and talk about what each region does here in just a moment. But let's start first with, let me take myself off of here so we can see a little better. Let's start with the brainstem. The brainstem really is an extension of the superior part of the spinal cord. If you look here at the spinal cord, the brainstem is sort of labeled right here, but you see where it gets a little fatter. This region here is the brainstem. And it does consist of those three major regions that are marked over here with the arrows: the medulla oblongata, the pons, and the midbrain. And in general, what does the brainstem do? In general, this region controls vital functions, such as adjusting the force and rate of heart contractions, blood vessel diameter, vomiting and coughing, respiratory rhythm, and others. So if it's an important vital function, it's associated with the brainstem. There are a couple other parts, for example, the hypothalamus here that we will touch on in a moment that has some important vital functions as well. But the brainstem itself, this extension of the spinal cord, is really charged with these rigid, pre-programmed automatic behaviors such as a startle reflex. What's a startle reflex? If someone were to jump from behind something and scare you, and you jump, you react because you're scared for just that brief second. That's a startle reflex. That actually is programmed, if you will, into our biology so that we can respond very quickly in the event of an unexpected startle. So even that kind of reaction is programmed into the brainstem. 10 of the 12 cranial nerves. We've not discussed the cranial nerves yet, but the cranial nerves are those nerves that we associate as coming from the brain as distinct from peripheral nerves that we associate, well, with spinal nerves. Cranial nerves actually come from the brain or brainstem itself, and 10 of the 12 pairs of cranial nerves come from the brainstem. If you suffer a brainstem injury because of the vital functions that the brainstem controls, it's often fatal. And a blow to the back of the head can sometimes damage the brainstem to the extent to where someone cannot survive. In addition to these vital functions, there are some major nerve pathways and impulse sorting that goes on. As an impulse comes from the spinal cord, how does it know which way to go? Well, the brainstem is going to aid in sorting that impulse. The brainstem also is important for linking the cerebellum to other areas of the brain. And we'll discuss the cerebellum's role in a moment, and you'll understand why that's important. One last thing we'll throw in here for the brainstem. The brainstem is also responsible for what's called the RAS, which is the reticular activating system. What this system does is it actually arouses us from sleep. When you are asleep and you gradually begin to wake up and you become more conscious, the RAS is that system which rouses you from a sleepy state to an awake state. And I mention this because many of the general anesthetics we use to put you to sleep for surgery, for example, affect the RAS. And the RAS is a component of the brainstem. So that's the brainstem. Let's press the right buttons and move to the diencephalon. And you see the diencephalon here, and I had to give you a couple different views. It's a little hard to see because, as you can tell, this is going to be within the brain itself. It's going to be, you can't see it from an outside view, and even if you're looking at an inside view, if you're looking at a mid-sagittal section, you're not going to see it really well. It's and again, here are some of the parts of it. You see thalamus, hypothalamus. The pituitary is not part of this, but we're going to be referring to it in a second. So it's going to be internal in the brain. The diencephalon's main job is to integrate sensory information with motor input at the subconscious level. Okay, what does that mean? It's going to be able to try to handle and process sensory information that comes to it from around the body, and then it's going to integrate that. It's going to connect that to motor input. So let's say you feel something, you're trying to pick up a pencil off your desk. As you feel the pencil, you have to start controlling how much tension you close with your fingers, for example, to pick it up. So the diencephalon's general role is going to be for sensory integration. But there will be some differences within this, some specialized roles within the diencephalon we'll get to here in a second. The thalamus, in particular, this sort of roundish region in here, is going to be a major relay station. And by that, I mean as an impulse travels from the brainstem and it reaches the thalamus, it has to be directed to the right part of the brain. As we'll touch on here in a moment, different parts of the brain control different things. And if you send information about your vision to this part of your brain, you're not going to be able to process it. So the thalamus, right in this center region here, is going to be very important for helping us direct traffic and making sure the right information gets to the right spot. Within the thalamus, you will see this term called, you've seen it other places, you'll see a reference to nuclei. Nuclei doesn't mean cell nuclei, like inside of a cell, but it means masses of nerve tissue with specialized functions, and we're not going to get too specific with that. I do want to spend just a couple of minutes on the hypothalamus because this is a very important part to know, because as we said before, it's going to share some functionality with the brainstem. There are several regions within it. It's very difficult to see on this. I mean, it's just sort of this whole area here, but there's going to be some very specific parts to it. If you look in your book, you'll see lots of particular regions. Again, we're not going to get into that much detail, but I do want you to understand some of the functions that we associate with the hypothalamus. It is, and I'll try to type them up here for you. One, it's going to be a major controller of the ANS, of the autonomic nervous system. It's going to influence sympathetically and parasympathetically glands, pathway, the squeezing of food through the intestine. Is going to affect the bladder. So the autonomic nervous system, that which you do not control, is going to be influenced by the hypothalamus. Another role is the production of hormones. I should have put a 2 there, sorry. Production of hormones. It's going to make some hormones and some are going to stimulate the pituitary, this region below it. You see the hypothalamus is going to have direct control over the pituitary and direct it to release hormones by producing hormones itself. So the hypothalamus will release hormones, which will tell the pituitary, now the hormones you've made, we're going to release those. So it's a major way of controlling the body, as well as autonomically. Three, it's going to be important for the regulation of some emotional and behavioral patterns. And that might seem odd because I think we tend to associate, if you know anything about the brain, behavior and emotion with the cerebrum, but together with the limbic system, which we'll talk about in a moment, the limbic system and the hypothalamus handle some of those basal emotions and behaviors. Rage, aggression, pain, sexual arousal, pleasure, those are going to be originating from cells of the hypothalamus. A few more, and it's not going to be very pretty here, but the regulation of eating and drinking. Sorry, I can't type this very well in this program. But one of the things contained in the hypothalamus, for example, is your thirst center. When you have increasing osmotic pressure, you have too little water, in essence, in your blood, that's detected, and you'll stimulate the thirst reflex, which will make you want to drink. A couple more. Control of body temperature. Body spelled with a B. Body temperature. So if you're too warm and the hypothalamus detects your warmness as blood travels through it, if you're too warm, it's going to direct the autonomic nervous system to stimulate the loss of heat. You're going to direct blood, for example, to your skin, where you will activate your sweat glands and you will try to lose some heat. If you're too cool, the opposite happens. So again, the hypothalamus is going to have a major role there. And let me give you one more, one that gets a lot of press, I suppose. It's going to help you control or regulate your circadian rhythms. I don't think I spelled that right, but your patterns of waking, sleeping, consciousness, all those things are going to be controlled by your hypothalamus. Another region, let me erase this is messy. Another region that you can't see in this view is the epithalamus, and this is going to contain the pineal gland. I can't type today. The pineal gland is going to be in the epithalamus, and that helps release melatonin. Melatonin, excuse me, promotes sleep. When we release more melatonin when it's dark rather than when it's light, and melatonin again is going to help set our body's clock so that we sleep at the right time and we're awake at the right time. And then the subthalamus, again, it's not visible on this view, is going to be also important in connecting motor areas of the cerebrum. So it's going to help us assist in our body movements. So the diencephalon, again, has the epithalamus, thalamus, hypothalamus, and subthalamus. General role is sensory integration, but like the hypothalamus in particular has several other specialized functions. Okay, let's get to one more in this video, and that is the cerebellum. About 11% of the brain's mass, but nearly half of its neurons are going to be in this tissue right here, in this what's called, again, the hindbrain or cerebellum. So the major functions of this tissue is to adjust your postural muscles of the body. Postural muscles are those muscles which help maintain your posture. So you need to have muscles, or rather a controlling system of those muscles, so that as you lean over or as you as you adjust your balance that you don't fall over. So these coordinate these rapid contractions of muscle, which help your balance and coordination. And the other role of the cerebellum is to serve as a programming and fine-tuning movement section to control your motions. As movements are generated in your cerebrum, as they're generated here, they're going to pass through, in part, the cerebellum so that you can smooth and coordinate your movements. There's a term that I may have mentioned before, that's mentioned here, called your proprioception. Proprioception is your movement in space, the stretch on your limbs, your body's location, and your cerebellum is going to help control and regulate your proprioception. As input comes in, you can take a step off the curb and you don't necessarily fall over. So timing, balance, movement, anything dealing with motor and coordination, we associate with the cerebellum. You see in this view, in the mid-sagittal section, this area called the arbor vitae. This term actually means tree of life. You have all of this white matter, all this myelinated nerve fiber to speed impulses, and you have this very distinctive tree-looking thing in the middle of the cerebellum. Again, there are thousands and thousands of fine synapses within this location which help coordinate movements. Incidentally, this cerebellum is a little different. It's actually a pretty good view, but it's actually of a sheep. So that's why you see a difference in the location of the cerebellum. I did want to mention one more thing here, and that is the cerebellum can be damaged permanently by trauma, by stroke, and it can be temporarily damaged or incapacitated by alcohol and drugs. If you have someone who has a disturbance in their motor coordination, we refer to this as ataxia. So when someone may have been drinking and driving and they're pulled over, the field tests are done actually to test for your ability to coordinate your movements. Consumption of enough alcohol is going to impair your cerebellum to where you're not going to have coordinated movements, and therefore you should not be driving a car. So we'll pick up with the cerebrum in our next video. Thanks.